don't know which reason is really the linchpin, but I suspect that it was the counterintelligence team of the CIA, particularly James Jesus Angleton and his organization. But some of his, some of the leaked documents, the burned memo documents, talk about that, and the implication that if he says something, we need to make it wet, which is a code word for assassination. And so that is a very real possibility as to what happened there. As to the subtleties of how it really got done, and the grassy knoll versus the other things, I didn't study at all really. But there's loads of people that are fixated with, how did he die?
It's pretty funny. I bring that up to like my dad and some of the people in his generation and stuff, and a lot of them just haven't really dove deep into it. And I remember I think this was during COVID, but I was like, hey, let's sit down, let's watch this documentary, because he was always like, no, that would never happen. And we watched the documentary after, and now he's like fully on board with me. He's like, yeah, it happened. It's cool. Crazy. But so then there's always the question of why. Why do you think the CIA would have been, and this is probably somewhat of an obvious question, would have been so against disclosure with the Soviets over these items?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, maybe they didn't have any intelligence that the Soviets had any crashes of their own. I mean, my impression is crashes happen all over the world. They seem to be. There's a bias in the book, at least, because it's English-speaking countries, so you get more Europe and UK and US, and you don't get any from China or Russia. There's one or two from Russia. So, they may have at the time perceived that Russia didn't have anything, and this is the ultimate secret. It's going to allow an improvement in their Cold War approach. I mean, this was very much in the Cold War time. I mean, they'd just been through the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Kennedy was sort of doing the olive branch thing, I think, to try to, hey, we need to come together and get to this more unified one world approach rather than fiefdoms across the globe. I still think that's one of our fundamental problems right now, along with all our nukes that are pointed at each other and potentially problematic. So I don't know if that quite caught just your question.
Yeah, well, it's just like, was it similar to, and we'll get to Oppenheimer here in a second, but the idea of the Manhattan Project racing for the nuke is that we didn't want them to have the opportunity at this technology before we had the technology type of deal?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And the question is, they may have had some hint of the potential of anti-gravity at the time, because this is 62 or so, or 63. And I think in the late 50s or early 60s, the U.S. sort of figured out anti-gravity as a function, or because of the evidence that they had from these crashed UFOs. And so, and that maybe ultimately enabled the entire hidden space program that people talk about now today. It's not just fancy Aurora craft hypersonic vehicles. It's gravity control. It's let's go to Mars. So I think that might have been a motivation for Angleton to say no, we cannot let this happen. We do not want them having the technological advantage, the national security advantage. It's just going to create so many different problems for us. And it's also going to engender a massive spying effort on the part of the Soviets, too, to get inside our organizations to try to figure out what we're up to. I mean, Angleton knew full well that, oh yeah, we had a spy in the Manhattan Project, and it took them a year afterwards to get a nuke, and they thought they had an advantage there, so they didn't want that happening again. So I think that was clearly a motivation. It's just too much risk. The risk reward ratio, hey, fine, what's Kennedy? It's he took us to the moon. He helped a little bit, but we'll get another president. It's just a person.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Anyway, that's my thought.
So backtracking here from Kennedy, I did mention it as we were getting into here, Oppenheimer. So there is another infamous thing within the magic documents talking about Oppenheimer and Einstein actually having a conversation, which, I mean, in itself, the fact that those two were a crossover at some point is pretty incredible. But this conversation, if you can dive into that and just
this is the Einstein-Oppenheimer memo. And it's like 6 or 7 pages or so, double spaced. It was from the time of, it was stamped top secret, but then sort of crossed out. And it said file OSRD, Office of Scientific Research and Development, which was Vannevar Bush's organization. But it was sort of a think piece about, do the ETs have a right to be here? What are the laws associated with having them here, or how would international law treat this? It sort of posed 5 fairly tough questions, and Einstein gave a very detailed, a thoughtful response. And so it's a very interesting read. It's very, the other majestic documents are more fact-based, military, what to do, how to do it, here's what happened.